What's going on, you guys? Welcome back to the Home Field Podcast. So, in today's episode, we're going to go over a few topics. The first one being the Thursday night football matchup that we had between the Arizona Cardinals and the Seattle Seahawks from last night. After that, we'll focus on our AFC report card where we go down each team in each division in the AFC. We'll assess each team and give them a grade based off of their performances the last few weeks. After that, we'll transition into the NBA for a little bit. We'll go over the unfortunate news with Klay Thompson suffering a torn Achilles in a training practice a few days ago in LA. And as of now, his 2020 season is over. And then we'll wrap up the episode talking about some of the trades that have gone down in the NBA over the last few days. Should be a fun episode, you guys. Hope you guys tune in. And with that said, let's get to it. All right, so let's dive into this Thursday night matchup that we had between the Seattle Seahawks and the Arizona Cardinals last night. So last night, Seattle beat Arizona by the score of 28-21 in a close divisional game last night. So coming into this game, the Cardinals were definitely the hotter team just after the way that they beat the Bills last week on a Hail Mary pass from Kyler Murray to DeAndre Hopkins. It's a huge win for them, and the momentum was definitely on their side coming into this game. And then with Seattle was kind of looking like they were trending in the wrong direction after losing to the Rams on the road last week. Russell Wilson didn't look good. He had probably one of the worst games of the year. And it just looked like the Seattle Seahawks were too dependent on Russell Wilson to win them games. But last night really proved anything but that. Seattle led wire to wire in probably the most important game of the year for them. And with the win, Seattle broke a three-way tie at the top of the NFC West. So just to kind of focus on the game here, I thought Seattle's offense looked a lot more balanced this week than in weeks past. And one of the big factors here was definitely Carlos Hyde getting back into the mix. So Hyde was coming off of a hamstring injury he suffered a few weeks back against Arizona, but his presence for Seattle was a difference maker. He racked up 80 yards on the ground on 14 carries and added a rushing touchdown to his performance as well. With Russell Wilson here, I thought he had one of, if not his most efficient games of the year. He completed 23 of 28 passes for 197 yards, and he threw 2 touchdowns, one of them to DK Metcalf, and the other one was to Tyler Lockett. The stats don't really show it, but Russ did run the ball a few times, and honestly, he could have thrown the ball probably close to 40 times just because he had to use his legs to get some yards since Arizona's secondary was able to at least keep Seattle's receivers in check to a certain extent, and Russ had to use his legs to pick up some first downs and gain some rushing yards. But all in all, I thought Russ was effective when he needed to be. He didn't turn the ball over, and I thought he put Seattle in great positions to take advantage of some scoring opportunities that they got. And then to kind of flip it on the defense for Seattle, I thought Seattle's defense played pretty well last night. They were going up against an MVP candidate in Kyler Murray, and they kept him in check as much as they could. Also, they were able to get some pressure on Kyler by sacking him 3 times. And the last one was key. So the last sack that they got was by Carlos Dunlap. He got the game-clinching sack at the end of the fourth quarter that essentially gave Seattle the win here. So to kind of focus on Arizona, I thought Arizona had a chance to win this game. I thought Kyler Murray played pretty well. He threw for over 250 yards, had 2 passing touchdowns, was able to pick up some first downs using his legs last night. So I didn't think that I didn't think Kyler Murray was the issue last night. I thought it was the amount of penalties, and their defense is what let them down. So Arizona as a team, they had 10 penalties, which resulted in 115 penalty yards. And some of these penalties that they got were just at the worst times that you could pick them up at, just really inopportune times. So there was one drive where Seattle had failed to convert on third down. However, the drive was extended because Dre Kirkpatrick was hit with a unsportsmanlike conduct penalty, resulted in a 15-yard penalty, and a few plays later, Seattle cashed in off of that penalty by scoring a touchdown. And then later in the game, this was in the fourth quarter, the Cardinals had 2 back-to-back penalties. One was one of them was a holding penalty, and then the other one was an intentional grounding penalty. The intentional grounding penalty came first, and then the holding penalty in the end zone came second. And the thing is, that holding call resulted in a safety because the holding penalty was in the end zone, which by the NFL rules results in a safety, and then Seattle was able to get the ball back. And the thing is, the Cardinals had a chance to take the lead on that drive, but just the mental mistakes cost them, and it really led to a 5-point swing in that case just because Arizona was only down 2 points at that point in the game. They get the safety, and then Seattle on the next drive tacks on a field goal after the safety, so it's a 5-point swing. And from that point, it goes from a 2-point deficit for Arizona to a 7-point deficit, and they just couldn't get a touchdown at the end of the game to tie it up. And I mean, just kind of looking at the defense though, Arizona's defense played hot and cold in this game, just like they did last week against the Bills. I mean, last week they were able to get 2 interceptions off of Josh Allen, and then this week they were able to get a decent pass rush on Russell Wilson. They sacked him 3 times, but really it was their secondary that hurt them the most, especially when it counted. Patrick Peterson, who's an all-pro cornerback, man, he's been getting burned the last couple weeks. Last week, he gave up a potential game-winning touchdown to Stephon Diggs with about 35 seconds left. Then this week, it was Tyler Lockett. Tyler Lockett was kind of running just a short in route, but he broke that route off, ran a fade into the corner of the end zone, and it just seemed like Patrick Peterson was caught in no man's land. And honestly, he was probably the one responsible for giving up that touchdown. And then there was another play in this game where I thought Patrick Peterson really got burned by DK Metcalf. So DK Metcalf caught a pass near the sideline. He makes an out cut instead of an in cut and completely shakes Peterson out of his shoes off of that juke. I mean, it may just be a tough stretch for Peterson, but he has been getting burned the last 2 weeks. And you could say the defense, to a certain extent, has been getting burned as well, especially with the secondary. So with Seattle winning last night, they moved to 7-3. They now sit atop at the NFC West. Arizona moves to 6-4. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, this division is still up for grabs. It'll be really interesting to see if Seattle continues to win, and it'll be interesting to see if Arizona can bounce back from this loss. So it wouldn't surprise me if this division really ends up coming down to the last week or two to figure out who gets the division crown in this one. All right, so let's go over the AFC teams. So I remember on the last episode, kind of discussed at the end of the episode going over the report card for how the AFC teams are doing at this point in the season. So we'll start with the AFC East, then the AFC West, AFC North, and then finish up with the AFC South at the end of this. So we'll start with the Bills. So the Bills are currently 7-3. And right now, I think the Bills, despite losing that gutting loss to the Arizona Cardinals last week on a Hail Mary pass from Kyler Murray, I still think overall the Bills are a solid team to contend with in the AFC. I think at this point, they're probably going to be the favorite to win the AFC East. Now, they do have to contend with the Dolphins. The Dolphins are a team that are surging in the AFC right now, but I'm still going to give the edge to the Bills in this case. I just like what Josh Allen has been doing this season. Josh Allen has been really kind of a surprise to me. And at this point, you can make a very valid argument that he's an MVP candidate. He has the stats to prove it. The Bills are one of the best teams in the AFC right now. And at this point, if he continues to play like this, he could potentially end up getting some MVP votes at the end of the season. It would not shock me in the least if he does. So based off of that, focusing on the defense a little bit, the defense has been giving up points this season, but I still think overall the defense has been playing up to snuff for the most part of the year. So to kind of give them a grade at this point in the season, I'm going to give them an A-, just because they have really exceeded expectations in my eyes, and they have a very good chance to knock off some teams if they make it to the playoffs this year. So I'm going to give them an A- at this point in the season. So up next, we got the Dolphins. They are currently 6-3. And the Dolphins have really just been on a surge the last few weeks. I remember a few weeks back, there were a lot of people that were kind of rough on Tua for a little bit for taking the starting job away from Ryan Fitzpatrick. I think that was mostly just a coaching decision. But Tua has definitely stepped up in the first 3 games that he's played in. I think he's played as well as he could have in his first 3 games. And not only that, the last few weeks, the defense and the special teams have really stepped up for the Dolphins. The defense is creating turnovers. And not only that, not Seattle. The Dolphins' special teams are not only getting great plays from their players, they're scoring touchdowns. They're blocking punts. They're getting punt returns. They're getting kickoff returns. All in all, in all 3 phases of the game, the Dolphins have been stepping up, and they've been stepping up in a big way. Right now, they're sitting at 6-3, and they're only 1 game back of the Bills, and they're currently on a 5-game winning streak. So the Dolphins are really a team on the rise right now. If I had to give them a grade, I'm going to give them a B+. They've earned it, especially in what I would consider probably the second quarter of the season. And if they continue to play like this, they could threaten the Bills at the top of the AFC. The AFC East. So I'm going to give them a B+. Moving on, we got the Patriots. So they're currently sitting at 4-5. Now, as of right now, they are currently on a 2-game winning streak. So they are definitely playing a little bit better than they were a few weeks ago. At this point, they pretty much have to win out the rest of their games if they want to even have a shot to make the playoffs. I will say this. I think Cam has definitely played a little bit better in the last few weeks. He's not turning the ball over. He is efficient with his passes. And the offense seems to be mostly reliant on the running game. And I'll tell you what, they've had somewhat of a revelation at the running back position with Damian Harris. He has stepped up in a big way. For this season already, he's had 3 100-yard rushing games. And he's not that far behind some of the rushing leaders in that category. And I think if they're able to get decent production out of their running backs, and if they're able to protect Cam moving forward for the rest of the season, I think that's really the best thing that they could hope for. I don't think that they're going to win out the rest of their games. They're definitely going to lose some games. They've got a matchup with the Cardinals that's going to be a tough one for them. But they could be competitive in that one. But they've got some tough games to play in the next few weeks. So if I had to give them a grade at this point, I'm going to probably give them a C, just because that they have been able to turn some things around the last few weeks. Had they lost to the Jets a few weeks back, I would have just given them a D, because at that point, I mean, you're losing to the worst team in the league, and you only beat them by 3 points. You were able to beat the Ravens last week, which was a big win. So in that sense, I'm going to give them a C. They have been able to turn some things around. The Jets are a dumpster fire. They're 0-9. I'm shocked that Adam Gase hasn't been fired yet from his job, but it's a Jets organization, so I'm not really too surprised at that. I'm going to give them an F. They've earned it this year just by their horrendous play, and at this point, they're probably a shoo-in to get the number 1 pick next year. So moving on to the AFC West, though, we've got the Chiefs. The Chiefs are sitting pretty at 8-1. What can I say, man? The Chiefs are literally the cream of the crop of the AFC at this point. Just, they're on a roll right now. They're on a 4-game winning streak. Patrick Mahomes is looking like the clear MVP candidate at this point. And as far as I'm concerned, they could probably win out the rest of their games. I know they got some tough games coming up. I know they got the Bucs, not this week, but next week. So that'll probably be their toughest game of the year. But the Chiefs are on a roll right now. The defense has been playing well. The offense has just been firing on all cylinders, and that's without even Le'Veon Bell really making any sort of impact on the offensive side of the ball. If they're able to get him going, the Chiefs are probably going to be the toughest team to stop in the AFC as far as I'm concerned. Very easy here. I'm giving the Chiefs an A+. They've earned it, and at this point, they're really going to be gunning for a Super Bowl spot. The only other team I could really think of at this point that they would have to compete with are probably the Steelers. So moving on, we got the Raiders. So the Raiders are sitting at 6-3. And as of right now, the Raiders, kind of similar to the Dolphins in the AFC East, the Raiders are a team on the rise right now. They've won 3 straight. They've been playing pretty well. And the one thing that they've stepped up on is their defense. Their defense has stepped up. They were able to shut down Baker Mayfield and the Browns a few weeks to only hold them under 10 points to keep them in single digits. And then they back it up with a performance against the Broncos last week. I think they only held them to I think they held them under 15 points. So the Raiders defense has definitely been stepping up. Derek Carr has been efficient. Josh Jacobs has been impressive once again. So I like where the Raiders are right now. The Raiders are definitely looking like a good wild card team at this point. And if they keep playing like this, they could definitely make some noise in the playoffs for sure. So if I had to give them a grade at this point, I'm going to give them a B plus. I was thinking about giving them an A minus, but I'm going to give them a B plus. They've had a decent roll the last few weeks, and if they continue this stretch, I could maybe bump them up to an A minus, depending on what their record is at the end of the season. So we get the Broncos next at 3-6. The Broncos have just been struggling the last few weeks. Now they did have a big win a few weeks ago against the Chargers on a walk-off pass from Drew Lock, but since then they have been struggling. Drew Lock has not been playing well. The defense is kind of in a disadvantage there just because Drew Lock has been turning the ball over a lot the last few weeks. Obviously, this team is young. They're trying to build a core of guys to rely upon the next couple years. So they're definitely going through some growing pains right now. But I think if they're able to kind of iron out some of these issues that they've been dealing with, especially turning the ball over, they could maybe get back to maybe 7-9, maybe 8-8. But they'd really have to turn some things around to get to that record. At this point, I'm going to give them a C minus, just because they have been struggling of late. And if Drew Lock isn't able to turn this around, they could definitely have a pretty bad record by the end of the year. And then we finish it off with the AFC West with the Chargers. The Chargers have just had some rough weeks the last few weeks. They're on a 3-game losing streak. And some of these games that they've been losing have just been absolute heartbreakers. I mean, some of these games that they've been losing by are literally at the end of the game. I remember I went to the Tampa Bay Bucks game when they were playing against the Saints a few weeks back, and we were watching the Chargers go up against the Raiders, and it looked like the Chargers had won on a walk-off touchdown pass from Justin Herbert. But the review overturned the call, and the Raiders ended winning that game at the end. So the Chargers they've had a tough stretch the last few weeks with the games that they've had. I'm not going to kill them for that. Their record doesn't show it. I'm going to give them a C minus, similar to what the Broncos were. They have been competitive. They just haven't been able to get these wins. I think with Justin Herbert, as long as he's able to limit the amount of turnovers and play decent, efficient football, I think that'll be the best thing moving forward. I think best case scenario is they get to like 5-11, maybe 6-10 at the end of the season. That's best case scenario. So at this point, I'm going to give them a C minus. So we'll move on to the AFC North. We'll start with the Steelers. Steelers are currently sitting at 9-0, and they are currently at the top of the AFC conference. And I'll tell you what, the Steelers, a lot of people are saying that the Steelers are overrated. And I can hear that argument to a certain extent, but the Steelers, they have to play who they're matched up against. And they've been playing extremely well the last few weeks. They've had some great wins. So they had a big win against the Ravens. They had a big win against the Titans. And other than that, they've been beating the teams that they're supposed to. They played the Bengals last week and absolutely smashed them. And I don't know really what else to say about the Steelers. The Steelers are a solid team. Ben Roethlisberger is probably looking like the comeback player of the year. And their defense has been outstanding. I should know because I have them on my fantasy team. And they're constantly getting me a decent amount of points every single week. So moving forward, looking at their schedule, I'm not saying that they're going to go 16-0, but they do have a potential. Some of these games are not that difficult. I think best case scenario with them is obviously they go 16-0, but I think realistically they're probably going to go 13-3, 14-2, maybe 15-1. 15-1 is kind of a stretch, but they have a really good chance to go 13-3 or 14-2 at this point, just based off the schedule that they have left. Steelers are a really good team, man. So giving them a grade at this point, I'm going to give them an A+. They've earned it. And like I said, they have a really good chance to finish at the top of the AFC as a number 1 seed. So we move on to the Ravens. So the Ravens are currently at 6-3. The Ravens are an interesting team, and I think it's in large part because I think a lot of these NFL teams are starting to figure out Lamar Jackson and how to beat him. And Lamar Jackson has definitely had his frustrations the last few weeks, and I remember he even said in an interview that the defenses know the plays that they're running before they're even run. And that just has to be deflating for a quarterback if that's the case. They've had a difficult road, so they were able to beat the Colts in a big game a few weeks ago, but then they dropped a really bad loss to the Patriots last week. So that is definitely not something that bodes well for them. But I think moving forward, obviously I still think this team is a playoff team. They are gonna get some players back on the defensive end that are dealing with some injuries right now. So I expect defensively this team to bounce back in a big way once those guys return. And I think for Lamar Jackson at this point, you just have to find a way to just generate some consistent offensive drives, try to get some points. I think at this point, that's the best thing that they could hope for. If I had to give them a grade, I'm going to give them a B. They've been up and down the last few weeks, but when they need to win the games that they need to, they have stepped up, except for that game against the Patriots last week. That was a tough loss for them. So up next, we have the Cleveland Browns. So the Cleveland Browns are sitting at 6-3, and the Browns are in a really tricky spot right now just because they're going to be without Odell Beckham for the rest of the year, and they're going to have to generate some sort of offense. And the offense has been struggling the last few weeks. I would like to think that Baker and Jarvis Landry would get on a better connection just because they need that offense to get going if they're going to be somewhat of a competitive force if they make the playoffs this year. But I just hope that they can get it together. Their defense has been giving up points this season. They just came off of a pretty ugly win against the Houston Texans last week. Now, I will factor in that it was some difficult weather to play in, so I'll give them that to a certain extent. But I just hope that the Baker and the offense could get some things going just to get some consistency. So if I'm going to give them a grade, I'm going to give them a B as well. So just kind of hope that they can figure some things out on the offensive side of the ball to get some momentum going on that side of the ball. And then the last team in the AFC North, we got the Bengals sitting at 2-6-1. Now, obviously this team is young. They're building around Joe Burrow, and he's had his moments for sure. He's definitely had some what I would consider some decent moments. I remember they were playing against, I think it was the Chargers a few weeks ago, and they played extremely well against them. And if he's able to just keep continuing to play decent, not turn the ball over, I think that bodes well for the Bengals. The Bengals do have to protect him, though. He has been getting hit a lot, and the Bengals are going to have to shore up that offensive line if they want to protect their most valuable asset on the offensive side of the ball. If I had to give them a grade at this point, I'm going to give them a C-. Just kind of been up and down the last few weeks, but if they're able to get some sort of consistency as a team, that'll bode well for them moving forward. The last division that we're going to talk about here is the AFC South. So we'll start with the Colts. The Colts and the Titans are currently tied at the top of the AFC South with a 6-3 record, but I'll start here with the Colts. The Colts are, how can I say this? They're an interesting team because they're so young, and I think to a certain extent they have overachieved as far as I'm concerned this year. I thought that the Titans would be at the top of the AFC South at this point in the year, but the Colts have really showed out and played really over expectations this year. I think Phillip Rivers has been decent for them this year. He's had his moments, though, where he's been turning the ball over and he looks like a 40-year-old quarterback, but there have been times where he stepped up and he's played decent. So when they were playing against the Titans, I thought he played pretty well. And not only that, I think if they're able to run the ball, as well as they've had, I think that'll work well for them moving forward. Their defense has been absolutely outstanding. Really, Darius Leonard. I don't know about you guys, but Darius Leonard should be considered for like a Defensive Player of the Year award. he has just been a man on a mission. That dude is just a monster on that side of the ball, and I'm really kind of surprised at the lack of shine that he gets, because honestly, he is a defensive player of the year type of person, just the way that he's been playing. So obviously, they're going to have a pretty tough road for these next couple games coming up. So they're definitely going to need the most from these players moving forward. If I had to give them a grade at this point in the season, I'm going to give them a B+. They're at the top of the AFC South right now, and they've been playing pretty well as of late. So moving on to the Titans. The Titans are in a situation where I think there's a lot of people that are starting to doubt this team just because the defense has been giving up a lot of points recently, and Ryan Tannehill and Derrick Henry have not been as effective as they were earlier in the season. So right now they're sitting at 6-3, and they just lost to the Colts, and they lost to the Colts in a pretty bad way at home. So I think right now the Titans are definitely in a precarious spot just because the Colts have, I think, overperformed this year. But they're going to have to get this straightened out, because if the Titans aren't able to figure out decent running, if they're not able to open up decent running lanes for Derrick Henry, and if Ryan Tannehill does not play efficiently like he did in the first half of the season, it's going to be tough sledding for the Titans. So hopefully they're able to figure out this defensive problem that they have, which is giving up the points that they've had. They've really been struggling of late with that. So at this point, if I had to give them a grade, I'm going to give them a B-. I'm just going to focus that more on the fact that they had a decent opportunity to take control of the AFC South against the Colts last week, and they just failed to do that. So I'm going to give them a B-. Then the Texans are currently sitting at 2-7. They've just been a disappointment this year. And it's not really because of the players per se. I really think that just the coaching personnel and the organization has just let this team down. Deshaun Watson is running for his life half the time just because the offensive line can't protect him. Outside of Will Fuller, he has really nobody to throw to. And it's just it's tough to watch this team just struggle. So they had a really tough game against the Browns last week where they just couldn't get anything going. And at this point in the season, they're pretty much just playing for a top 5 draft pick at this point. At this point, I'm going to give the Texans probably a D. They have not played well this year, and it looks like they're going to be looking at a top 5 draft pick this year. And then the last team in the AFC that we're going to focus on here is the Jaguars. I've said it before. I've said it again. I'll say it again. The Jaguars are just a black hole to me. There's nothing that really stands out about this team. They're at 1-8, and they've lost 8 straight games. I mean, I'm really surprised that they beat the Colts the first week of the season. But since then, they've been an absolute they've just been an abomination as far as I'm concerned. So at this point, I'm just going to give them an F. They're kind of similar with the Jets in this point. They're really kind of vying for that top spot in the draft next year. And that's where I think it's going to be at. And I think they'll be very close to that. So that'll wrap up the NFL portion of the episode. We'll transition into the NBA for a little bit. So we'll start with the unfortunate news that broke yesterday about Klay Thompson of the Golden State Warriors tearing his Achilles. So it was confirmed yesterday, and one of the major pieces for Golden State is going to be out for the entire 2020 season. I mean, this is just devastating news for Klay and the Warriors. And to be honest with you, I think it essentially ends any realistic chance for the Warriors to compete for an NBA title this year. You just got to feel for Klay. He's coming off of an ACL tear that he suffered in the NBA Finals last year against the Toronto Raptors, and then backing it up with an Achilles tear on top of it. I think he suffered the tear in a practice session in Los Angeles a few days ago. All in all, he's going to miss 2 full seasons back to back, and you wonder if Klay is going to be the same again after dealing with both of these injuries. I guess the one positive is that most of his game is centered around catch and shoot jumpers. So I'm still of the mindset that he'll be effective in that regard. I think his defense is going to suffer a little bit just because I don't think he's going to have the same recovery speed when he's defending against somebody. I mean, at this point, you just hope nothing but the best for a speedy recovery for Klay. And rehabbing an Achilles injury is no joke. That recovery usually goes for 6 to 9 months, and it could go as far as a year, depending on how careful he is, or depending on how slow the process is. So hopefully he can bounce back from this. And then to kind of focus on the Warriors here, the Warriors championship window is starting to close, and I think it's closing fast. I'm of the mindset that the Warriors were a championship contending team this year if everybody came back healthy. With Klay out, though, I still believe they'll make the playoffs, but they're not going to be competing for a title this year. It's just the Western Conference is just too loaded this year. I mean, just to kind of look at some of the teams that we have in the West right now, the Lakers look prime for another championship run with LeBron and Anthony Davis. The Clippers still have Kawhi Leonard and Paul George. The Nuggets have a solid team with Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic leading them. The Dallas Mavericks are a team on the rise with Kristaps Porzingis and Luka Doncic. Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum are still in their primes with the Portland Trailblazers. And the Suns just added Chris Paul to pair up with Devin Booker. So Golden State has to compete with all of these teams, and it's not going to be easy for them in that regard. And to kind of focus on their roster here, their roster is going to have to really step up. I mean, Steph Curry is turning 33 in March. Draymond Green is clearly not the same player that he was a few years ago when the Warriors were making their title run. And Andrew Wiggins, who they just acquired from Minnesota a few months ago, he's on a team now where the expectations are much higher than anything that he's had to deal with when he was playing for Minnesota. And the year that they made the playoffs, or really the year that they had to step up with Jimmy Butler being on the roster, Jimmy Butler basically bossed the entire team around and basically said that none of those players could really run it with Jimmy Butler. So obviously Andrew Wiggins is definitely going to have to step it up for the Warriors this year. Now, they did add Kelly Oubre Jr. in a trade, and they did draft James Wiseman. So I guess that does buffer the blow from Klay's injury somewhat. But the Warriors are going to need both of them to step up immediately if the Warriors are going to have some sort of success this year. Now, I'm not going to jump to conclusions and say this is the end of the Warriors' dynastic run. I think it's way too early to say that. But I think it's fair to say that their championship window is closing. They would have needed all their blue chip pieces on their roster to compete for a title this year. And I just think losing Klay is just going to be too much for them to overcome this year. I just hate to see injuries derail a team's title aspirations. But it looks like that's the case for the Warriors this year. Now, I think realistically, they could finish maybe 4th or 5th, maybe 6th in the Western Conference this year if they play decent this year. But I mean, they could end up out of the playoffs if Steph Curry doesn't have a monster year. I think Steph Curry is going to really have to step it up this year and have an MVP type performance this season if the Warriors are going to be relevant in the Western Conference playoffs this year. So we'll definitely see how the Warriors season ends up going, but it's definitely going to be a difficult one for them this year if they're going to have any sort of success to get to the playoffs. And to kind of keep it in the NBA, the trade market in the NBA has been buzzing for the last few days. So let's get caught up on some of the big moves that have happened so far. So like I said a few minutes ago, the Suns added Chris Paul in a trade with the Oklahoma City Thunder. So the trade sent Ricky Rubio and Kelly Oubre Jr. to the Thunder, and I'll get into Kelly Oubre Jr. in a second. Overall, I like this move for the Suns. They add some veteran leadership to the team with Chris Paul, and they form a solid backcourt with Paul and Devin Booker. They also have DeAndre Ayton on their roster. So with this trade, I expect the Suns to perform pretty well this year after getting this trade completed. And then Kelly Oubre Jr. So at first, after he was traded to the Thunder, he was then traded to Golden State to buffer the injury from Klay. So the Thunder have an opportunity to get the Warriors' 2021 first-round pick if the Warriors end up being in the 21st. If the Warriors end up in between the 21st and 30th team in the draft next year, and if that doesn't happen, the Thunder do get 2 second-round picks from the Warriors in that same draft. I think Golden State had to make this move just because they had to they had to replace the hole that Klay Thompson leaves, but their luxury tax is going to be insane this year. I've seen a bunch of different reports where it could fluctuate from like 25 million to 80 million. So I really couldn't get a solid number to figure out what their luxury tax is going to be, but it is definitely going to be high for this year. But I think Golden State made the best out of a bad situation in this case, just to replace Klay Thompson, and I think Kelly Oubre Jr. is a decent piece to replace Klay Thompson in this sense. So moving on, we got Dennis Schroeder. He is heading to the Los Angeles Lakers after the Lakers completed a trade with the Oklahoma City Thunder. So this trade sent Danny Green and the Lakers' 2020 first-round pick to the Thunder in exchange for Dennis Schroeder. For me personally, I like this move for the Lakers. Schroeder is an upgrade at the point guard position, and I'm of the mindset that they didn't give up too much for Schroeder with Oklahoma City, and overall, I think this is going to be a good move for the Lakers, and it's definitely an upgrade to anything that they've had at the point guard position in the last few years or so. So, to kind of keep Danny Green in the news here, so the 76ers are sending Al Horford to the Oklahoma City Thunder in exchange for Danny Green and Terrence Ferguson. Danny Green is just getting moved all over the place. He's going from the West Coast to the East Coast one after this one. So, like I said, Al Horford, he's going to the Oklahoma City Thunder. I think for OKC, he's a decent player to add for them. They do get some veteran leadership with him. And at this point, Oklahoma City is rebuilding, so I think his leadership is going to be big in that sense. And then to kind of focus on the 76ers here. 76ers added some decent role players in Danny Green and Terrence Ferguson. So I think overall, I think both teams made out well with this trade. Then the next trade that we have here is the Milwaukee Bucks were able to acquire Drew Holiday in a trade with the New Orleans Pelicans. So the Pelicans got Eric Bledsoe, George Hill, and 3 first-round picks in return for Drew Holiday. I'm going to be honest here. I think the Pelicans won this trade here just because of the draft capital they were able to get back from Milwaukee. Drew Holiday is a good player in my eyes, but I don't know if he's worth 2 players and 3 first-round picks in return. That seems a little high to me. But good on the Pelicans for making this trade, though. I think the Pelicans get some decent depth players here in Bledsoe and George Hill. And then with Milwaukee, I think Milwaukee gets a well-rounded player in Drew. But I think he's going to have to step up in a big way if he's worth all of that capital that they gave up in that trade. So, and they're going to need him to step up in a big way if the Bucks are planning to make a title run this year. So the last trade that we have here is the Trailblazers acquiring Robert Covington in a trade with the Houston Rockets. So the Rockets send a 30-year-old Covington to Portland to team up with Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum. And the Rockets in return get Trevor Ariza and 2 first-round picks. So I don't know why the Rockets made this trade. It didn't seem to make that much sense to me. Robert Covington is much younger and has a lot more to contribute than Trevor Ariza does. Ariza is 35 years old, and he's basically at the tail end of his career, and he's clearly not the same player that he was with his first stint with the Rockets. As far as I'm concerned, the Trailblazers easily won this trade. And like I said, I just don't understand why Houston would push the button to make this trade. Just didn't make a lot of sense to me. So other than that, you guys, that's going to wrap up the episode for today. I want to thank you guys for tuning in to the latest episode of the Home Field Podcast. So just to kind of give you guys an update, I didn't really go over the NBA draft that much in this podcast episode. If you want to go check that out on YouTube. I just put up the video yesterday, so I'll go over some of the picks that stood out to me. And then I didn't go over the matchups for week 12 in the NFL. So that will also be on YouTube. I'll put out a video for that. I'll probably put that out tomorrow. I'll put that out on Saturday. So definitely expect that this weekend. And then for the next episode, we'll go over the NFL games from this week that are upcoming. We'll go over some of the college football games that are going to be played. We'll go over some of those games on Monday. And then if there's anything else that kind of transpires in the NBA trade market, we'll go over that as well for the next episode next week. Other than that, you guys, thanks for tuning in, and take it easy.